Welcome to the Westminster Effects Doxology Podcast, where we exist for the glory of God and the tone of his people. I'm Cody Fields, president of Westminster Effects. Go buy stuff for your guitar at westminstereffects.com and join the discussion in the Westminster Effects Green Room on Facebook. I'm joined in person by...
Hey everybody, Bradley Cox, pastor of Resurrection Church in Greer, South Carolina.
And via the interweb, for the first time ever, we have Dr. Joe Rigney from Moscow, Idaho. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Did we want to, I don't know, just go ahead and address the thing on your head.
Yeah,
just in case.
Yeah, depending on if this ends up being on video or not. So the Gulf of America is no joke. I just want to say, it leveled up in a way that you wouldn't even believe.
Yeah.
No, we were on a spring break down in Florida last week, and we're doing a bit of fun stuff out in the water with the red flags going, and I went up a wave, and the wave flipped me over a couple of times, and that sand, in the Florida is really, really great, but it's basically like sandpaper, and so it just basically took off a big chunk of my forehead, and so I've had these nice bandages on for the last week. So that's what's going on there. But don't mess around with the Gulf of America.
So, any superlatives that people need to know about you? We got that thing out of the way. Yeah. Who is Joe Rigney, first off?
Yeah, I am a professor at New St. Andrews College here in Moscow, Idaho. I teach theology, literature, and I oversee our Master of Divinity program called Greyfriars Hall. And on top of that, I am a pastor at Christ Church here, and then I coach high school football, high school baseball. Got three boys, a lovely wife. That's kind of the basic rundown of what I do all day.
You are a full plate.
Yeah, you are not bored at all.
No, I'll rest when I'm dead.
Yeah,
fair enough. Yeah. So we brought you on to talk about is it upcoming? When does this thing release?
No, I think technically now we can say that it's out. So Amazon sometimes gets a little weird and doesn't get it in time. And so, it's like, if that's the official release, then I think you can actually get it from Amazon now. It's been out Canon's been shipping them for about a couple weeks now. So.
Oh, good. So Your new book, drum roll please, The Sin of Empathy. So maybe how do you start that conversation in the first place in 2025 where empathy is the thing?
Yeah. So basically, this is a project I've been working on for quite a while. And it basically is addressing the way that compassion, empathy, pity, you pick your term for it. I chose empathy because it's the modern term that kind of gets the most play. Mm-hmm. But the way that particular human disposition can be corrupted, just like all human passions can be corrupted. So whether you're talking about desire or fear or anger, we all sort of intuitively recognize that there's good and bad desire. There's good and bad fear, holy and unholy fear, maybe righteous and unrighteous anger. But fewer people, I think, recognize that feeling bad for someone who's hurting or sharing their emotions could somehow be a bad thing. And I think over the last decade or so, we've really seen when that particular virtue can be weaponized and corrupted to steer, sabotage, hijack institutions, damage families. I don't think this is necessarily a new problem. I think it's maybe it's the same way that the internet doesn't create all the problems, but it amplifies them. Modern world didn't create this problem. It's as old as dirt. But it does kind of amplify it and magnify it in a particular kind of way. So I wanted to, I've been working on that and trying to pinpoint that underneath a number of different theological, cultural battles is this dynamic involving what I would more precisely call untethered empathy, empathy that's unmoored, unanchored to what is true and what is good. So true compassion, the kind of compassion that the Bible commends, needs to be anchored to what is true and what is good for someone. But when emotions get in the driver's seat, they typically run roughshod over what is true and good in the long run, and instead focus on the short term, on the feelings. And when feelings are God, God isn't. And so you kind of have an idolatry element working in there. So that's kind of the rough outlines of what I'm trying to do in this book.
That was concise and thick. I love it. Bradley, what do you have for him?
I mean,
where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I keep thinking about James where he talks about, you have not because you ask not, and you ask wrongly because your passions have gone amok.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the exact wording there, but I always talk to people about, emotions are God-given things. They're not all the same. They're different emotions have different virtues, different value, and according to Scripture, different lifespans. I mean, anger's to be slow to rise and quick to be put away.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not all on the same shelf, but and they don't all function the same way. But when they're untethered, emotions are not meant to be in the driver's seat. Truth is. So I haven't read the book, but I'm intrigued by what you're talking about, because I think empathy is one of those emotions or passions that we don't hear a lot of talk about, but the good and bad side of that, the tethered and untethered reality of it.
Yeah, and I think it's and it's understandable. So I think that in the same way that I think people would generally think that anger is more, say, prone in general to being out of order. You can be blinded by anger, things like that. And so to say that compassion could do that, compassion in general is a good thing. It's a God-given. It's either a concern for people who are hurting, right? A feeling bad, feeling some sympathy for them. Or the way empathy gets used is more as just emotion sharing. Whatever they feel, I feel. I join them in whatever they're feeling. And insofar as that's all we're talking about, it's like, well, that's a good thing. The Bible actually commands something like that: weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice. There's a kind of sharing of emotion there. But emotions are powerful, and in the ruins of Christendom, which we live in, you really do see the way that even these best virtues can be weaponized. And so one of the guys that actually influenced me a lot on this is C.S. Lewis, because he recognized, he wrote multiple books in which he basically describes the way that the best things, when they go bad, go really, really bad. So love, if you untether love, any of your natural loves, your love for your family, your love for your friends, romantic love, if any of those take the driver's seat and get untethered from love for God, he says they become demons. And so, and he wrote about this, that even like things like mother love, that can become demonic. And you go, how could mother love ever be demonic? And he knew in writing that people would react strongly and say, what are you talking about? You're attacking the highest and the holiest things. And he's like, no, I'm trying to situate them. Right. It's got to be anchored. It's got to be submitted and governed by what is true, by what is right, by God, by divine love, however you want to say it. It needs to be governed. And so he shows in a number of different works the way that different loves can go wrong. And what I've done is basically picked up one theme of how love for victims, love for the hurting, love for the sufferer, because it's such a great and glorious good, can become really, really demonic and destructive when it likewise becomes untethered. Lewis calls this, in The Great Divorce, he calls it the passion of pity. And he says it's used as a kind of emotional blackmail. And I think, if people kind of are puzzled, what are you talking about? Anybody who's been on the receiving end of a pity party or a guilt trip will know exactly what I'm talking about. When someone magnifies and amplifies their distress in order to get you to do something. Whenever you feel kind of emotionally blackmailed, like if I don't give you what you want, you're going to sulk. Everybody's experienced that. Most of us have done it a time or two. And
just two?
Yeah, maybe more. But it's that sort of dynamic. And what I'm putting the burden not on the person who's doing it, though they should knock it off. I'm wanting to put a certain kind of burden on the person who's on the receiving end of that, the person who's being blackmailed, and to say, if you go where their emotions are demanding you go, if they're trying to, if their emotions are leading you into sin or demanding that you endorse or affirm sin, then for you to go with them in the name of empathy would be to commit the sin of empathy.
You define empathy as feeling what someone else feels.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could unpack that a little bit. I do a lot of premarital counseling. I'm actually starting a new session with a new couple as soon as this is over today. And one of the passages of Scripture that I always take these couples to is Colossians 3. After Paul talks about all the things we're to put away, he starts to talk about put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts. And I always talk to the couple about compassion, which maybe you would agree is somewhat synonymous, at least with empathy, pity, as at its basis being understanding.
Yeah.
Conflict happens when we don't understand. We lack understanding. And so in order to resolve conflict in a healthy way, there needs to be understanding. But understanding doesn't necessarily mean affirmation.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily, it might mean that I understand how the person feels,
right,
or why they feel the way they do, but I may not necessarily join them in that emotion. Right. Is there like a difference between, I understand tethered empathy, tethered compassion, feeling what some, weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice. But then to have an understanding with someone else, regardless of if it's a marital context or something else, mm-hmm. that doesn't necessarily affirm how the other person feels, but at least empathizes at the level of understanding. Does that make sense? I'm not even sure what the question is in there, but I wonder if you could, expound on that.
What it gets at is, I think part of the confusion around this is that these terms are fairly flexible. There is no kind of universal agreed upon definition. Empathy only came into the English language in the early 20th century. It doesn't exist before that. And it's fairly malleable, and you can sort of see people using it in different ways. In fact, one of the things I've learned over the last 7 or 8 years talking about this is how many people will come to if I talk about the sin of empathy, they'll say that's not what true empathy is. True empathy is, and I've gotten 50 different definitions, right? So 50 different true definitions. And I think that's actually part of the reason that this term and this idea is so easily corrupted and hijacked, because it doesn't have a kind of sturdiness to it. It is this newer term, and it's often presented, empathy is at least, as a kind of improvement upon sympathy. Like, it's sort of like when someone's hurting, sympathy's good. That's kind of when you feel bad for them. But empathy's better because you sort of go in deeper with them and you dive in deeper to their emotions. And that's sort of, empathy, or sympathy 2.0. It's the upgraded, it's not the beta version anymore. We've now figured it out. And part of what I'm doing is that more total immersion is actually more dangerous and more potentially destructive, because it's, the image I've used over the years is if someone's sinking in quicksand, you want to help them. And apathy would be if you don't care at all and you just wash your hands of it and walk the other way, right? Do the Good Samaritan thing, but the bad guys in that story wipe their hands of it and walk along the other way. True compassion is going to reach in there, is going to get down with them, is join them in that suffering, but it's going to remain anchored to the side. It's going to grab a branch. It's going to have one foot on the shore so that you can actually have leverage to help them and pull them out of the pit. The empathy that people often commend is jump in with them, both feet, and now you've got two people stuck in the quicksand. Two people are drowning. So to your point about the understanding idea, when you do any deep dive on kind of definitions that psychologists and researchers use, they often will distinguish between what kind of cognitive empathy and emotional or affective empathy. Cognitive empathy, I think, is what you were talking about with the idea of understanding. Basically, I see how you got there. I understand why you feel that way, but I don't necessarily need to share the emotion to follow the train of reasoning or circumstances that led to you having it. Whereas the affective or emotional one is when I actually go beyond that to share the emotion. And I think both of these are good. To use another biblical text that often gets used in premarital counseling, Peter tells husbands, live with your wife in an understanding way. Right? And live with your wife according to knowledge is what it literally says. And so the idea is you need to somehow sort of put yourself in their shoes. What do things look like from that person's vantage point? This is a basic aspect of love, and one that think the Bible commends and is great. But the issue is that the biblical version of that, the righteous version of that, always is going to reserve the right not to blaspheme, right? So if you think about one of the stories I use in the book is Job. We think about Job's suffering, but his wife also suffered immensely, right? She lost 10 children in a day. And then comes to him and says, you still hold fast to your integrity, curse God and die. Yeah. And it would be really easy in a moment of empathy. Where's she coming from? She's coming from 10 dead children. That's where she's coming from. She's coming from her whole life. Her whole world has just been absolutely obliterated. She's angry. And so it would be very easy in that moment to join her in her anger at God and say, you know what, honey, you're right. God is the worst. He is terrible. He is wrong. And Job says to her, no, you're speaking like a foolish woman.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And sort of, and he goes, beyond and actually corrects her. Shall we receive evil from the Lord, good from the Lord and not evil? Right.
Yeah.
So he actually offers a correction and kind of a mild rebuke to a grieving mother who just lost 10 children. At the very least, though, our compassion should say, if this person's emotions demand that I shake my fist at God and curse him, I can't go there, no matter how much I may love them. In fact, love for them demands that I not go there. And I think what we often find is that in our suffering, when the emotions are white hot, we do stuff like that, and we demand that others join us, validate it, affirm it, endorse it, and that's the problem. That's the thing that I'm trying to correct, because in the name of that, then you can kind of get swept off your feet, and you got marriages can get shipwrecked on that sort of thing, but churches can get hijacked by that, and all sorts of different ways. It goes really bad.
So the secular culture might look at that story and say that Job lacked empathy.
That's exactly right.
But we would say, no, he didn't. It's not that he lacked understanding of where she was coming from, right. But he didn't commit the sin of empathy by jumping in the quicksand with her, because it says in all these things, Job never sinned.
Right.
That's a great analogy, because he didn't lack empathy or compassion, I don't think, but he wasn't going to join her in blasphemy. I think that's
And if you flip it around and you give an example, I often use this, especially when I'm wanting to be a little bit pokey. Who's the most empathetic leader in the Bible? And it's Aaron at the golden calf.
Wow.
Love it.
And you say, people kind of go, wait, what are you talking about? Well, you think about it. You have a distressed and traumatized people. They've been slaves for hundreds of years. They've just been through the ringer when it comes to 10 plagues. They've seen rivers turn to blood, frogs and gnats, and hail of fire. They had to put blood on their doorposts so that their kids didn't die. And then they watched a wall of water crush an entire army. They thought they were going to die there. They've just been through it again and again and again and again. And through it all, Moses has been sort of their anchor, right? He's been God's prophet, God's man on the ground, leading them out. When he raises his arm, they win. When he lowers his arm, they lose. When his staff goes up, that water parts. When his staff comes together, that water comes crashing back down. He's been a big deal. And now he's gone. He's up on the mountain. He's in this, smoky cloud thing, and they don't know what happens to him. And so they come to Aaron, who's been left in charge, and they say, we're scared, right? We don't know what happened to Moses. Give us gods who will go before us. In other words, what are they wanting? They're an anxious, agitated, fearful people who are very vulnerable, and they want somebody to make them feel safe. That's what they want. And they know, hey, in Egypt, they had gods, and their gods made them feel safe. So we want to be made to feel safe too. Give us gods. And Aaron, finds their distress unendurable. He can't take it. Their agitation gets the best of him, and he gives in. He follows their lead and says, okay, I'll go with it. Give me your gold. Fashions the calf, and they start doing their dancing and committing gross idolatry. 10 minutes after they got the 10 commandments, saying, "Hey, this is the thing you don't do." And now, all of a sudden, in the grip of emotion and agitation and angst and whatever other emotions you want to throw in there, Aaron has done what must not be done. He's conceded what should not be conceded, and he follows the people into sin. And then this is what's how this often works, and then has the gall to blame them for it, right? Yeah. When Moses comes down and calls them to account, it's all of a sudden, well, Moses, you know the people, you know how they are, the people. I was just standing here, and it's this blame shift. And this is how this often works, is when other people's emotions take us by this and then grab our steering wheel, then we often feel that, therefore, once they've done that and we followed them into the sin, that we can blame them for it. And the whole point of that passage is you can't blame them for it. You're responsible to God for your own emotional vehicle. Wow. And you should be compassionate, and you should be loving, and you should be full of the bowels of mercy and kind and tenderhearted and all of those things. But it has to be anchored to who God is and what he says and what is good for this person in the long run.
Wow.
So you brought up earlier victims and people who are hurting. I think you could also include alleged victims.
Correct.
where you haven't proven anything yet. How does one stay tethered in that kind of situation? And that can be in any number of situations, whether it's a legitimate criminal investigation or some kind of allegation within a local church or what have you.
Right. Yeah, this is actually one of the things that kind of got me into this, is watching as the Me Too movement took off, and was doing so in response in a number of cases to really great horrific evil, abuse, and all kinds of other victimization. But what happened is, again, the good thing got corrupted. How did it get corrupted? Well, when it turned into believe all women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In other words, when the fact of the accusation was as good as a conviction, and that as a pastor, I was obligated not just to take it seriously, which if someone brings an accusation, I was abused, my husband's been abusing me, or my father abused me, or whatever, should you lean in with gravity in that moment and go, this is serious? Absolutely. That's what's responsible. But should you immediately say, I believe you? I think that's a dereliction of duty to simply say that the first person to make the accusation, because I don't know who the victim is yet. And you say, what you're saying, she might be lying? It's like, she might be, especially in a culture, especially in a moment where all of a sudden victimhood began to confer invulnerability. I think this is one of the things we saw over the last decade or so is, what I affectionately call the victimhood Olympics, where the greatest victim wins. This is what was behind a lot of the intersectionality and critical theory stuff. Like, that was an ideology that basically justified, hey, we're going to stack up characteristics and give you points based on how much of an oppressed person you are, what oppressed classes, which boxes can you check in the ledger of oppression, and whoever has the most boxes checked wins the victimhood Olympics.
It's sola victimhood. It
is that you're justified. In fact, what's ironic is the apotheosis of that, the end point of that, was a few years ago after the horrific attack on Israel by Hamas. A few weeks after that attack, a spokesman for Hamas went on some Arabic news show and basically said, we are victims. Everything we do is justified.
Mm-hmm.
Like he just said it that way. And it was that. like why did he say it? He's like, well, because the West for a couple of decades has operated according to that principle. That was the principle. We are victims, therefore everything we do is justified. And so when that starts to get going, and victimhood confers invulnerability, you can't be questioned, challenged, you can't even, no pushback, no nothing. All of a sudden there's an incentive structure in place to be like, well, I want to be a victim. I want to get in the victim. How do I get in the victim category? I think some of what has been behind the sort of meteoric rise of the trans thing was people who were in the oppressor category, according to the various critical theories out there, right? If you're white, if you're straight, all of a sudden, if you become trans, you're now at the high. You just went from the bottom to the top. You were the oppressor. Now you're the most oppressed, and that's an element in play. And so I do think so. To your specific kind of scenarios, if someone comes to my office and says, "Hey," and there's a deep emotion in it and all this kind of stuff, I want to, at some measure, share that emotion. I want to join them in that, but I also want to reserve the right, to make my own judgments. And that doesn't it means, and if they say, someone's abused me and it's criminal, then the first thing I'm going to do is call the cops. All right, I got to get the police involved. If it's less than that, if it's a he said, she said type of fight, I want to be, the Bible tells me that I need to be able to hear both sides before I make any kind of judgment.
Right.
And this is, I think, the thing that people found intolerable, and why empathy became this corrupting influence, is that even withholding judgment while you sought to get off all the facts was regarded as callous and uncaring. Yep. You're cruel. Simply, you're not saying that they're lying. You're simply saying, I don't know enough yet. I need to be able to hear what is. And the thing about this is every parent, good grief, like, this is what, when our kids are young, this is like, and if they have siblings, this is like 80% of parenting, is one kid running in saying, so-and-so did something to me. And if you immediately pass judgment and mete out consequences based on that one testimony, you're going to do a lot of injustice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What's the wise thing to do? They come running in. Someone, Susie hit me. Okay, time out. Susie, tell me what happened. And tell me what you did. And then, okay, Billy, tell me what you did. And what you want to hear is, you want to hear both sides, because you're going to try to sort through, is this simply an attempted manipulation of justice through tears? And I think there's some people who just think that never happens. And I go, you have a much higher view of human nature than I do. I have the heart is far more deceitful and people are more wicked, and they will take the holiest and best of things and wield them against soft-hearted people.
Yeah. So why there's this trope in Christianity that we're always late to the party. Whenever secular society comes up with an idea, we adopt it 10 or 15 years later and then act like we're the cool kids now. Yeah. I remember in a Facebook argument about so-called homosexual marriage encountering the term empathy for the first time literally 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Where the argument literally was, you need to have empathy and that's why you need to support it. So why has it taken us so long to finally address it?
Yeah, I think it's because so there's two things. One is a good reason, which is the Bible tells us to be compassionate. And so the minute that someone accuses us of being heartless, we flinch. We go, whoa. Mm-hmm. We kind of get brought up short and we want to go, I don't want to be heartless.
Right.
I don't want to be callous. So I kind of, at least we kind of, self-censor. I think part of what happened is that progressives figured out that was a great steering wheel for evangelicals, right? And so it wasn't just about being compassionate; it was about a reputation for compassion. And so progressive basically became the arbiters of what compassion was, right? And so to be truly compassionate means to affirm. That's what love means, affirmation. Compassion means affirmation. And that was the definition. And clearly, because you're not going along with gay marriage or sanctioned sodomy or whatever it is, you're not being compassionate. And we began to have, I talk about this in the book, we basically ended up with a little progressive on our shoulder. I call it living under the progressive gaze. There's the idea like little progressive on your shoulder, evaluating everything you do and say. Are you being compassionate enough according to those definitions? Are you pursuing justice enough according to their definitions? Are you being winsome enough? Are you have the right tone? All of these sort of things as evaluated not by Scripture. Instead, progressive sensibilities, hostilities, ideologies were laundered through the Bible, and Bible verses were slapped on them. And then the Bible verses were used as the tip of the spheres, the cutting edge of the steering wheel, which then a lot of churches began to sort of adopt and then self-enforce. And so frequently what would happen is it wasn't actually progressives. You might have been in an argument with an actual progressive, but the issue would be is if you held your ground in that, you might start to get policed by other nice Christians, right? If you pushed back, if you said, sodomy's gross. If you'd have said that 15 years ago in that Facebook argument, like sodomy's not only sinful, it's gross. Yeah. So we're not going to sanction that. You would probably not have just had a blow up from the unbeliever, but you would have had other Christians saying, hey, that's not a very winsome tone. That's not a very kind tone.
We need to be nice to this community.
We need to be nice to this community. Do you know how much they've suffered? Do you know? And then all of a sudden you're going to get statistics trotted out. Do you know how many members of this community commit suicide? Do you want more kids to commit suicide because you rejected them? And what is that? It's a direct appeal to your compassion. But what's the ultimate goal? To mute your resistance to a moral evil, right? You're resisting a moral evil that's harmful to people. It's harmful to children. It's harmful to society. It's a deeply destructive ideology, and you're resisting it. And the goal is just kneecap you so that you stop, and they can keep steamrolling.
And people have no idea how much the affirmation as love has crept into Christendom. So we do every now and then we'll do worship song critiques. We'll just read the lyrics and say, is this biblical? Does this even make sense? And if I want my traffic to blow up, all I have to do is mention Stephen Furtick or Elevation Worship. Yeah. I forgot to send you this. We got a comment, and we get comments on that kind of stuff of, oh, you're a bunch of Pharisees and all that kind of stuff. Right. People have gone so far as to say, you'll pay for this. Right. God will strike you for this. And so it's the people who demand that we affirm them are also the least affirming people of us.
100%.
So why aren't they being loving toward us?
You've never been to a mob unless you've been to an empathetic mob.
Right.
Like, and it's true. And the reason is because emotions actually flow into one another. And so this is, again, another kind of key element here is that C.S. Lewis has a quote someplace where he says, "Pity, when untethered he doesn't say it's not untethered. It's when pity's disconnected from the moral law and from other concerns like charity and justice, leads through anger to cruelty." That's the line. Pity leads through anger to cruelty when it's untethered. And you can think why. It says because most atrocities are motivated as a response to the other guy's atrocities.
Yep.
Real or imagined, right? This is why there's a guy who wrote a book years ago, 2016 book called Against Empathy, doing a similar kind of thing. He's not a Christian. But the quote that I always remember from him is, he says, when most people hear the word empathy, they think of kindness. I think of war. Right? Like, in other words, and it's because if you analyze, say, the Middle East, he looks at that and he goes, yeah, that's just empathy run amok, because it's empathy for our side justifies cruelty to your side and vice versa. And so it's amazing how much cruelty you can mete out in the name of empathy, because empathy leads through anger to cruelty. That's part of how it works. The other thing that's interesting about the what you just said about is if you want my since you guys are worship leading, the part of this is about worship leaders. Mm-hmm. I think that the big defect, this is the hot take on the big defect in evangelical worship, is often not what's present, although there can be problems there, but it's what's missing. How many churches do you know that regularly sing imprecatory psalms?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But what you just described was actually someone you're going to pay for this. God's going to strike you down.
Imprecatory.
That's literally an imprecatory psalm. They just did that back to you. As I've thought more and more about like the worship issues, it's people will point out things like, oh, this song is a little too Jesus is my boyfriend or something like that. And there's a criticism to be made there. But oftentimes what makes it that is not the presence of deep emotion, right? I long for you. I ate for you in a dry and weary land. That's just Bible talk. All of that's in there. It's that the guy who said that also said things like, oh, that you would slay the wicked. Do I not hate those who hate you? Yep. Break the teeth of the wicked, right? Yeah. He prayed those things in the same Psalms. And what we do is we cherry pick. We want that one verse. Mm-hmm. We want the sentimental verse. And so we pull it out and build an entire song around that one verse from that one Psalm, rather than sing the whole thing. So one of the things I love about our church community is that we make a habit of singing all the way through the Psalms. Like, we sing the whole thing, and it brings you up short a little bit. I remember the first time, this was years ago, but we were doing some through composed Psalms just in our home that I had picked up from some folks out here. And we sang Psalm 149. Which is this great psalm, let Israel rejoice in their maker. Let the children of Zion be joyful in their king. Let them praise his name with the dance. Let them sing praises to him with the timbrel and harps. For the Lord takes pleasure in his people. He will beautify the humble with salvation. And you're just singing it, and you're like, you can just, pick your tune, whatever your style is, like, you can make that go. Then it goes on. Let the saints be joyful in glory. Let them sing aloud on their beds. Let the high praises of God be in their mouths. Ready? And a two-edged sword in their hands, to execute vengeance on the nations and punishments on the peoples, to bind their kings with chains and their nobles with fetters of iron, to execute on them the written judgment. This honor has all his saints. Praise the Lord. That's how it ends.
Yep.
Wow.
Right? What does it do to a congregation if that's in your repertoire? Doesn't have to be every song, but if you sing the Psalms, you're going to get it a lot. Like, what does it do to the imagination of your people when that's the sort of thing that you sing to God? And I think that's probably the biggest missing piece in modern evangelical worship, is that there is literally no place for that, because it would also affect your arrangements. Like, there's certain kinds of things that there's certain tunes you could not sing that to. Like, it would feel like the disjunction between the music and the arrangement and the lyrics would be so strong that you're like, this isn't going to work. So it's actually going to put pressure on the actual content of the music, the style.
Make minor keys great again.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Exactly right. One of the things I really appreciate about our church is, for one, we do have a full band. It's more of a modern style, but not the Jesus is my boyfriend silliness. And so one of the pieces of our culture is all of the musicians show up prepared, right? Which makes room for us. Our worship minister, Stephen Turner, implemented this 2 years ago now, is before every rehearsal, we read all the way through a psalm and discuss it.
Right.
And we started at 1. We're at 100. I think we're at 112 this week.
Okay.
And regardless of what the psalm is, we're going to discuss it, and we're just going to read straight through it. And sometimes this is nice. It's straightforward.
Yeah.
Other times it's, man, that is heavy. What was David going through? What was going through his mind? And so what we've started to do this year is where our worship minister is putting one psalm a month to music to help our congregation memorize scripture and to sing the psalms.
Right.
And so eventually you keep it up long enough, you're going to have to start dealing with those kinds of things.
Yes.
But that's part of the maturation of a local church, I would think.
That's absolutely right. And it does. And it actually is it's an inoculation against this kind of manipulation that I'm talking about. Right. Yeah. Because you have both. You don't just have the sentiment. You don't just have the good vibe emotions or the sorrowful kind of emotions, but there is righteous anger, but it's righteous anger. It's anger that's going Godward. It's anger that's calling on God to be the one to break the teeth of the wicked. So it's all of those kind of emotions have a place to go, as opposed to the syrupy kind, which basically reduces kindness to niceness, and therefore you don't have the moral fortitude. There's a way, there's a gender dynamic to this, just quite frankly, that we have to be honest about. Certain women and certain men don't like those parts of the Bible. They make them uncomfortable. And so there is and it's typically softer men, right? So softer men are uncomfortable with those harder passages and with the musical accompaniment that would be required in order to sing them well.
Right.
But it actually, it forms a kind of sturdy foundation that then means when you sing, as the deer pants for streams of living water, so my soul pants for you, it lands differently because it's rooted in a different soil. In fact, that's actually a really good, it reminds me of another Lewis quote. Lewis has a quote where he says, mercy, detached from justice, grows unmerciful. Mercy detached from justice grows unmerciful. He says that's the paradox. He said, just as some plants will only grow in mountain climates, in the rocky crag, he says, so it seems that mercy will only grow in the rocky crags of justice. If you transplant it from the mountain, he says, to the swamps of humanitarianism, it becomes a man-eating weed.
Wow.
And he says, all the more dangerous. It's all the more dangerous because it still shares the same name as the mountain variety. Wow. So it's the shared name. And this is literally what's going on with my work on empathy is people go, I think empathy just means, feeling kind for people. But, it's Colossians 3, it's 1 Peter 3, it's that sort of thing. Why are you talking about the sin of empathy? And I go, when it's planted in the rocky crags of justice, when it's anchored to something true, I'm totally fine with that use of the term. But what we have is an entire culture which has taken that good thing and planted it in mere humanitarianism, in the swamp, and it's become a man-eating weed, and Christians in particular are getting eaten by it. They're getting devoured by it because they think, that's just that thing that I've read about in the Bible. But the Bible version was up in the rocky crags. It was in the mountains. It was attached to justice. That one's not, and therefore it will devour you.
Any last thoughts, Bradley?
Yeah, it's sobering to think about. The guy that I consider to be my pastor, Joe, he says this, that Satan doesn't print $6.50 counterfeit bills.
Right.
He'll get as close to the truth as he can without compromising a lie. And when you take these virtuous things that are virtuous when they're anchored to truth, and you uproot them out of the mountain and you put them in the swamp of humanitarianism, it's amazing how deceptive and destructive this kind of thing can be in the local church. And I don't know why exactly we're afraid to call it out. You're obviously not, and I don't think we are. It needs to be called out more, but I don't know if it's just a longing to be safe and play it safe. Church in the Western world in large part is safe. Our goal is to make people feel better about themselves and God, it seems, and as opposed to I don't know, the willingness to be full of grace and truth, like Christ our Lord is. And so I think this is, I'm glad you've written this book. I look forward to reading it. I think this needs to be addressed. I think it's a root issue in culture and in the church.
Yeah, that's great.
Good stuff. Where can people find you?
Yeah, only social media I'm on currently is Joe_Rigney. That's Twitter or X or whatever we call it these days. Mm-hmm. The other place that you can find my stuff in general, I write for a number of different outlets. For years, I wrote for Desiring God, so there's a lot of old articles there. Mm-hmm. I write for American Reformer, and then the main place is Canon Plus. So subscription service, but lots of videos, articles, and various and sundry other.
Yeah, I actually just got done with listening to The Things of Earth a couple weeks ago on Canon Plus. So that's great. There you go. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming, Joe, and go love God, love your neighbor, make some music, everybody else. We'll see you next time.